The fluorescent lights in the FBI headquarters buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow on the office where Meghan Queen stood, frozen. Her hands trembled as she stared at the report in her grip, a brutal document that named her as the one who leaked information during a critical drug operation. America's most wanted drug lord had slipped through their fingers, and they were blaming her. Around her, the room was silent. But the silence was heavy, thick with judgment. Eyes darted, whispers rose like steam, and Meghan felt like a fire was consuming her from within. She tried to speak, but her voice drowned in the icy wall of suspicion. Meghan Queen, you are hereby terminated from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, effective immediately, the director announced in front of everyone. No trial. No hearing. Just humiliation. Just condemnation. Meghan stood, stunned. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts. Her colleagues, people she had fought alongside for years, couldn't even meet her eyes. Friends became strangers. Their silence was worse than any words. Security escorted her out like a criminal. That night, alone in her apartment, Meghan stared out at the city lights of Washington, D.C. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with news alerts and messages from reporters. Her name was everywhere. Headlines screamed, FBI insider accused in drug lord escape. She shut it all off, packed a small bag, and booked a one-way ticket. Where could she go where no one knew her name? No one cared about her disgrace? A picture on a travel blog caught her eye, Lombok, Indonesia. An island of calm blue seas, quiet villages, and no headlines. No FBI. No drug lords. Just silence. She didn't know what she was running toward, but she knew exactly what she was running from. Lombok welcomed her with warm breezes and the soft rustling of coconut palms. She stayed at a modest inn by the ocean, tucked far from the busy tourist spots. The sea shimmered under the sun, endless and free. Meghan often sat alone at the edge of the beach, letting the waves wash over her bare feet, hoping the ocean could wash away her past too. And for a while it did. Until one night, when the shadows returned. She had just returned from a walk when the knock came, soft but deliberate. She opened the door a crack. Rough hands grabbed her. She screamed, but the night swallowed her voice. A cloth bag covered her head. The smell of gasoline filled her nose as the van raced down narrow roads. Her heart pounded like a war drum. Fear coursed through her veins. She knew exactly who they were. The drug mafia. They hadn't forgotten. She had seen their secrets, known their faces. And even though she was innocent in their world, that was enough reason to kill. The van screeched to a stop. Someone yanked her out. Cold sear struck her skin. Then came the push. Meghan fell. The world turned black as her body plunged into the freezing ocean. She kicked, struggled, gasped, but the weight of fear was heavier than water. Her limbs weakened. This was it. She was going to die in a foreign land, unknown and unloved. And then, a light. Through blurred vision and gasps for breath, she saw a small wooden boat cutting through the waves. A man, soaked in seawater and moonlight, reached for her. "Hold on!" he shouted in accented English. She didn't know who he was, but in that moment, his voice was the anchor she clung to. The man, whose name was Salim, pulled her into his boat with all the strength he had. Her body was limp. Her eyes barely stayed open. He didn't ask who she was. He just wrapped her in a blanket, whispered prayers she couldn't understand, and began rowing toward the shore. She awoke in a small room, the walls wooden, the smell of ginger and lemongrass in the air. The first thing she saw was a soft, wrinkled face beside her, an older woman with kind eyes. "Rest, Anik," she said. "You are safe now." That was Abia City, Salim's mother. Meghan tried to sit up, but pain surged through her body. Salim entered with a bowl of soup. "You're okay now. You're with good people. You're safe." Tears welled up in Meghan's eyes. Her voice cracked. Why did you save me?" Salim didn't hesitate. "Because no one deserves to die alone." In the days that followed, Meghan healed slowly. Her wounds were more than physical. The betrayal, the disgrace, the near-death experience, it all haunted her. But there was something in Salim's quiet strength, something in Ibis City's motherly presence, that gave her heart a reason to breathe again. Every evening, when the sun dipped into the horizon, a melodic voice would float through the air, the adhan, the Muslim call to prayer. It captivated her. She didn't understand the words, but her soul recognized the serenity in the sound. A calmness settled in her chest every time she heard it. Not like anything she'd experienced before. One evening, she asked Salim, "What is that sound? That call?" He smiled gently. "It's the adhan. A reminder to pray. To connect to Allah." Megan nodded, eyes distant. "It's beautiful." He looked at her kindly. "Maybe it's speaking to your heart." But peace wasn't something Megan could hold on to for long. Shadows still lingered. The people who had thrown her into the ocean weren't done. And deep down, Megan knew they would come again. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had found something. Someone. Maybe even a new reason to live. The days in Lombok moved slowly, like soft tides brushing over the shore. Megan Queen, once the sharp, fast-talking agent of the FBI, now found herself waking up to the scent of boiled herbs and the hum of a roaster crowing outside a wooden cottage. The simple life she never knew she needed was unfolding in front of her. Every morning, Ibis City served her a warm meal, sometimes porridge, sometimes rice with fried banana. Megan began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: home. Salim rarely spoke much, but when he did, his words were calm and comforting. He taught her how to mend fishing nets and boil seaweed for cooking. His hands were rough from years on the ocean, yet there was a gentleness in his touch whenever he handed Megan a bowl or supported her arm when she stumbled. The village knew a foreign woman was staying at Salim's house, but they didn't pry. Here, privacy was respected like sacred ground. Each evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Megan sat near the beach, toes buried in the sand, eyes fixed on the soft, fading light. And then she would hear it, the adhan. That call again. The first time she heard it, it gave her goosebumps. Now it gave her peace. It called not just to ears, but to the heart. "What does it mean?" she asked Salim one evening as they walked along the shoreline. He paused, then replied, "It means come to prayer. Come to success. It reminds us that there's more to life than just survival." Megan thought for a moment. "I've never felt something so pure." That night, Megan couldn't sleep. She stepped out onto the porch, looked up at the star-filled sky, and let the wind wash over her. Her thoughts were heavy. She thought of Washington, the chaos of the FBI, the betrayal, the cold courtroom stares. But she also thought of the ocean that nearly claimed her life, and the warm hands that pulled her back from death. And through it all, one sound kept returning. The adhan? Like a compass guiding a lost soul home. She didn't know it yet, but the first spark of Iman, faith, had already lit inside her. The next day, she walked to the village masjid with Salim. It was a simple building, white walls, blue roof, and a courtyard filled with children playing with pebbles. No security, no formality. Just peace. Inside, she met the imam, a gentle man with a white beard and soft eyes. Megan sat quietly as he gave a short lesson to a small group. He spoke about trust in God, about patience during hardship, and about how every storm eventually clears. She understood only parts of it, translated by Salim in a whisper, but her heart understood all of it. After the lesson, she approached the imam and said softly, "I want to learn more about Islam." The imam nodded with a warm smile. "Then you have already taken the first step." But not all footsteps are easy. That night, as Megan helped Ibis City peel vegetables, a chill ran down her spine. The memory of that black van, the rough hands, the plunge into the sea, it all came rushing back. And just then, a knock at the door. Salim opened it cautiously. A villager stood there, out of breath. "Salim," he said urgently. "A black car was seen driving near the village border. Outsiders. They're asking questions about a foreign woman." Megan's face turned pale. "They've found me." she whispered. Within minutes, Salim sprang into action. He gathered a few supplies, whispered instructions to Ibis City, and helped Megan into a long cloak to disguise her identity. They couldn't stay. Not anymore. The mafia was back. Salim had a boat tied not far from the beach. With the moon overhead and waves lapping softly, they moved quietly through narrow paths, away from the eyes of anyone who might be watching. As Megan stepped into the small boat, her heart was pounding. She glanced back at the little house where she had begun to heal. The door was still open, the lamp inside still glowing. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Ibis City placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are not alone, Megan. Allah is with those who seek truth. Go." They rowed under the cover of darkness, the boat cutting through the water with soft creaks. The sea, which once tried to claim her life, now carried her again, but this time with hope. But that hope was short-lived. In the distance, headlights. A larger boat. Fast. Salim squinted. "They're coming." The mafia had followed them. Gunshots rang out in the night air, splintering the calm sea with terror. Megan crouched low in the boat, heart racing, her fingers gripping the edge. "We have to hide," she cried. Salim pointed ahead. "There. The rocks." He veered the boat behind large black stones jutting out of the water. With skill and calm, he guided the boat into a narrow gap just wide enough to hide them. They held their breath as the enemy boat passed. The sound of engines faded. Only the crashing waves remained. Megan collapsed against the side, her hands shaking. Salim reached out and held her hand firmly. "You're safe, for now." When they finally docked on a distant beach hours later, Megan stepped out with aching legs. But her heart was stronger now. They walked into a small village, even more remote than before. A new beginning. Again. And that evening, in a room lit by candles and comforted by Salim's quiet presence, Megan said softly, "I want to become a Muslim." Salim looked at her, eyes wide with emotion. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I've been broken, hunted, and lost. But this peace I feel, it has to mean something." He smiled deeply. "Then tomorrow, we go to the masjid." Morning came quietly in the hidden coastal village. The sky stretched wide above them, painted in soft pastels. Megan awoke to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant rhythm of waves kissing the shore. But this morning was different. It was the day she would declare her faith. Salim had already returned from far prayer when he found Megan sitting on the porch, her hands clasped, her eyes set on the horizon. "I'm ready," she said softly. Salim looked at her, the sunlight catching the edge of his hopeful smile. "Then let's go." They walked together through the narrow path between coconut trees and thatched roof homes. Villagers smiled and nodded, unaware of the quiet transformation taking place in Megan's heart. She wore a loose, long-sleeved tunic Ibis City had prepared for her. It was simple, but to Megan, it felt sacred. The masjid stood small but proud. White walls. A blue dome. Children chased each other in the courtyard as the imam swept the prayer hall. Inside, the imam greeted them with warmth. "Are you at peace with your decision?" he asked Megan gently. She nodded. "I've never been more certain." The imam looked into her eyes. "Then Bismillah." Standing barefoot on the cool tile floor, Megan repeated after the imam. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." Tears welled in her eyes as she uttered the final words. The air shifted. The weight on her chest, years of betrayal, fear, running, lifted. For the first time in her life, Megan Queen felt reborn. After the Shaida, the villagers offered warm embraces and shy smiles. One of the women brought Megan a soft cream-colored hijab and helped her wrap it gently. Megan looked at herself in a small mirror and blinked. It wasn't just a change in appearance. It was her soul that felt covered, protected. That night, the sound of the adhan echoed once more through the village. But now, it was no longer a distant melody. It was a call to her. A reminder of the promise she had made to God, and to herself. In the weeks that followed, Megan immersed herself in learning. She read translated Qur'an verses by candlelight, asked Salim endless questions, and sat beside Ibya City as she recited soft supplications. Her heart began to soften in ways she didn't expect. The trauma she had carried from her FBI past, from the betrayal, from the ocean, began to heal in pieces. Salim often watched her from a quiet distance, never pushing, never rushing her path. And Megan came to admire the quiet strength in him, a kind of man she never knew existed. One who didn't judge her by her past, but welcomed her into his life like a soul already known. One evening, while sitting under a mango tree, Megan turned to him. "Why did you risk so much for me?" Salim smiled, eyes fixed on the golden sky. "Because sometimes, we're chosen to protect someone, before we even know their name. But danger, like shadows, never truly disappears." One afternoon, a group of local fishermen returned in a hurry. Whispers spread through the village. A suspicious black car had been spotted near the coast. Outsiders asking too many questions. Megan's heart dropped. "They're back," she said, her voice trembling. Salim nodded. "They haven't given up." Fear surged through her again, but this time, it didn't paralyze her. Her faith had become a shield, and Salim, a silent pillar by her side. That night, the three of them, Salim, Megan, and Ibya City, packed a small bag. Again. Not in panic this time, but in preparation. They would head to a safer village deeper inland, where a small Muslim community could help keep them protected. But as they stepped outside, the sound of an engine cut through the quiet night. A black SUV was parked near the edge of the trees. They'd been found. Salim grabbed Megan's hand. "Run." They dashed through the narrow alleyways, slipping between bamboo fences and banana trees. Megan's heart pounded, but not from fear, this time, it was from adrenaline and faith. Behind them, they heard shouts in English. "She's here." They reached the edge of a small cliff overlooking the ocean. A hidden trail led down to a boat Salim had prepared weeks earlier, just in case. As they climbed down, a voice shouted from above. "Stop, or we'll shoot." A shot rang out. Dust exploded near Megan's foot. She screamed, stumbling, but Salim caught her, shielding her with his body. They reached the boat, Salim pushing it into the water with everything he had. "Get in!" Another gunshot. It missed, but barely. As they paddled away, Megan turned to see the men standing on the edge of the cliff, faces twisted in rage, but unwilling to follow. Not yet. They disappeared into the blackness of the trees. For hours, Salim rowed through the open sea. Megan sat quietly, wet clothes clinging to her, the wind chilling her skin. But in her heart, peace. Even through fear, she had found peace. When they finally reached a remote island at sunrise, Megan collapsed on the sand. Exhausted. Alive. Grateful. They hid in a stilted hut, built by distant relatives of Salim who welcomed them without question. Life returned to silence. Megan resumed her prayers. Her studies. Her slow healing. One afternoon, while she sat with Ibya City shelling peanuts, Salim approached. His eyes, always calm, now shimmered with something new. "Megan," he said. "Yes?" She looked up. He knelt. "I don't know what our future holds. But I do know that in this journey, from fear to faith, from chaos to calm, you've become a part of me. I want to face whatever comes next, with you." Megan's breath caught. Tears filled her eyes. "I've already said yes, in my heart." A few weeks later, in the same masjid where she said her Shahida, Salim and Megan were married in a simple ceremony. There was no luxury. No flowers. No crowd. Just love. And the sound of the adhan, echoing softly in the distance. The wedding was small, yet deeply meaningful. Megan wore a soft, cream-colored hijab gifted by Ibya City, while Salim donned his best batik shirt. The local imam recited the nikah with a quiet reverence, and the villagers who had gathered blessed the couple with heartfelt smiles and humble prayers. Megan stood beside Salim, hand in hand, her heart wrapped in peace she had never known before. Not the peace of silence, but of surrender. Not the calm before a storm, but the calm that comes from surviving one. That night, under a sky full of stars, Megan and Salim sat outside their new home, a small wooden house by the shore. The air was cool, the sea sang its endless lullaby, and the glow from their lantern flickered like a heartbeat. "I feel like I've started my life all over again," Megan whispered, her head resting on Salim's shoulder. He looked at her, his voice steady. "That's what love and faith do. They don't erase the past. They give it meaning." The following months passed like a slow, healing breeze. Megan and Salim settled into a life of simplicity and purpose. Salim returned to fishing, waking before dawn, offering his morning prayers, and setting out into the sea with confidence. Megan found joy in helping Ibya's city with community work, distributing food, teaching local children English, and organizing women's gatherings in the village masjid. Her presence was once foreign, but now it was welcome. She had become part of the village fabric. She studied Islam daily, reading translations of the Qur'an and asking Salim questions that sometimes made him smile with wonder. "You think like a scholar," he would say. But Megan wasn't seeking scholarship. She was seeking truth. And she was finally finding it. Yet peace has a price. And shadows don't always fade. One quiet evening, as Megan sat with a group of village women under a mango tree, a young boy ran up, panting. "There's a car! A black one! Near the market road." Megan froze. Not again. The village had been quiet for so long that she began to believe they had forgotten. But danger doesn't forget. It only waits. Salim returned home with a tense face. "It's them," he said. "The mafia. They're back in the region." Megan felt her breath shorten. Her palms grew cold. But this time, she didn't cry. She didn't panic. She looked up at Salim. "We don't run." Salim nodded. "No. Not anymore." They met with the imam and a few trusted villagers that night. A plan was made. Salim knew an old friend who now worked with local law enforcement in Mataram. They would gather evidence of the mafia's movement, pass it discreetly, and seek protection. But it had to be done quietly. "We won't let them harm our village," Salim told the imam. Megan, now standing beside him, added, "And I won't let them take my peace away again." A week later the trap was set. Megan walked through the village market as bait, headscarf wrapped tightly, eyes scanning. She carried a small recording device under her shawl. Salim watched from a distance, his body tense, ready. They spotted the men, 3 of them. The same faces from the night she was thrown into the sea. They followed her. Megan turned into a quiet alley behind the market, just as planned. The men approached, confident, sneering. "We warned you," one of them growled. But before he could grab her, 2 plainclothes officers appeared from behind crates and shouted, "Freeze!" The men turned to run, but found themselves blocked. Within minutes they were arrested. Handcuffed. Taken away. The nightmare, for now, had ended. Back in the village, news of the arrests spread quickly. The villagers celebrated quietly, smiling, exchanging dates, and offering prayers of gratitude. That night Megan sat with Salim on the porch, both watching the horizon darken into dusk. "I thought I'd have to run forever," she said. "You stopped running the moment you chose faith," Salim replied. "That was your first victory." She turned to him. "And you gave me a second chance." He smiled. "We gave each other one." Years passed. Megan became a beloved teacher in the village. She taught young girls not only English and reading, but also how to speak with strength, carry their beliefs with dignity, and never let fear dictate their path. She helped open a small learning center beside the masjid, named it Nur al-Huda, the light of guidance. Salim continued to fish. And in time, they welcomed their first child, a girl with wide brown eyes and a name full of meaning, Aliyah, the elevated one. Megan would often tell her daughter bedtime stories, but not from fairy tales. From real life. Her own journey, from darkness to faith. From disgrace to dignity. From fear to strength. And in every story, she would whisper softly, "We never walk alone, my love. Not when Allah is near." One day, Megan stood before a crowd at a local gathering, women from the village, some from neighboring towns, sharing her story publicly for the first time. "I used to work for the most powerful intelligence agency in the world," she began. "But it took an ocean, a near-death experience, and the kindness of strangers to teach me what true power is." She paused, her voice steady. "Power is peace. And peace is only found when your heart finally surrenders to the truth." The women clapped gently, many with tears in their eyes. Salim stood in the back, Aliyah in his arms, pride shining in his eyes. Megan Queen had once been a fugitive, fleeing the shadows of falsehood, chased by those who wished her gone. But now she was Megan Lady Compassion, a believer, a mother, a wife, a teacher, a woman who found peace where she least expected it. In a distant village. In the heart of Islam. In the call of a distant adhan. And in the arms of a fisherman who saw her not for who she was, but who she could become. They say fate walks quietly beside us, striking only when we least expect it. On that sweltering Jakarta afternoon, fate wore a camouflage uniform, and carried the weight of a choice that would change everything. Second Lieutenant Arya had just completed his shift, patrolling around Monas under the punishing sun. His steps were firm, calculated, and his eyes scanned the streets like a machine on autopilot. But there was still a calmness about him, a rare composure only disciplined soldiers could master. His uniform clung to his back, damp with sweat, but Arya didn't care. He was focused on one thing, getting to his motorbike and heading home. But the sound stopped him. It wasn't just a scream, it was a soft, broken plea, spoken in a foreign language. Arya's eyes darted toward a narrow alley off the main road. The sound repeated, more desperate this time. He moved. Cautiously, he approached the alley's corner. His boots crunched against the gravel as he peered behind a weathered concrete wall. What he saw made him instinctively shift into alert mode. A pale-skinned, blonde-haired woman stood cornered by three men. Her eyes, wide with fear, met Arya's for a split second. It was enough. One man stood arrogantly, arms folded and smirking. The other two inched toward her, chuckling under their breath. Arya stepped forward. "Permisai," he said calmly, voice laced with quiet authority. The sound of his voice sliced through the tension. All three men turned toward him, confused. One of them sneered. "Just chatting, bro. Nothing serious," he said in broken English, gesturing toward the woman. Arya said nothing. His eyes locked onto each man, cold and calculating. The tension escalated quickly. Without a single wasted motion, Arya stepped forward and shoved the nearest man aside. The thug tried to swing back, but Arya deflected it, grabbed his wrist, and brought him to the ground. Within seconds the other two joined him, writhing in pain, groaning on the alley floor. The woman, still frozen, covered her mouth in disbelief. Arya turned to her. "Are you okay?" he asked in English. His accent was stiff, but clear enough. She nodded slowly, too shaken to respond. "I'm Arya," he added. "Emily," she whispered, her voice trembling but soft. Her accent was unmistakably American. Arya scanned the alley once more, then gestured for her to follow him. "Let's get out of here." He led her down the street and into a small warung, one of those hole-in-the-wall coffee shops that only locals trusted. They sat across from each other. Emily tried to steady her breathing while Arya quietly ordered 2 glasses of sweet iced tea. For a few minutes neither spoke. Then, slowly, Emily began explaining. "I got lost. I was looking for a friend. Someone I used to know during college, an Indonesian. I had his address, but I guess I ended up in the wrong area." Arya nodded, listening carefully. She glanced at him. "You don't talk much, do you?" "I talk when it matters," he replied, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. For reasons she didn't fully understand, Emily found his presence comforting. Maybe it was the way he had stepped in without hesitation. Or maybe it was the silence that didn't feel awkward. She could trust him, at least for now. When their glasses were empty, Arya stood. "I'll take you to the address," he offered. "You don't have to. It's not safe for foreigners to wander alone in unfamiliar places," he said plainly. "Especially not today." She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "All right. Thank you." They left together. Arya's black military sedan navigated through the narrow streets of Jakarta, dodging mopeds and food carts like a ballet of chaos and control. Emily sat in the passenger seat, clutching a small paper map she had taken from her bag. After a few quiet minutes, she asked, "Are you always this calm?" Arya kept his eyes on the road. "It's part of the job." She smiled. "Well, today you saved me twice. First from thugs, now from being hopelessly lost." He allowed the corner of his mouth to lift slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was something. When they finally reached the address, it was a disappointment. The small house was abandoned. Windows shut, no movement inside. Emily rang the bell. No answer. A middle-aged woman stepped out from the neighboring house and informed them in Baisa that the tenant had moved out 2 weeks ago. Emily's shoulders sank. "I came all the way from New York for this," she muttered. Arya turned to her. "Do you have another plan?" She shook her head. "He doesn't use social media. This was the only lead I had." Arya paused, then took out his phone. "I'll find you a nearby hotel." 15 minutes later, they arrived at a modest hotel in Menteng. Emily gathered her bag and looked back at Arya. "I mean it. Thank you. If you hadn't been there." Arya simply nodded and turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, her voice stopped him. "Tomorrow. If you're not busy, would you like to grab coffee?" He turned, surprised. For the first time, a real smile crept onto his face. "We'll see," he said, and disappeared into the Jakarta dusk. That night, Emily sat alone in her hotel room, laptop open, staring at the files she had carried all the way across the world. Hidden in the depths of her hard drive were investigative reports, leaked documents, and photographs. She hadn't come to Indonesia just to reconnect with an old friend. She came hunting for a truth that could shatter lives. And now, she had a soldier's name echoing in her mind. Arya. The next morning, the skies over Jakarta were unusually clear. The traffic, however, was as chaotic as ever. Arya sat in a quiet street-side cafe, not far from his military base. He had no real reason to be there, at least that's what he told himself. But the memory of Emily's voice lingered from the night before. "Coffee?" she'd asked. And now, here he was, staring at a half-empty seat across the table. He hadn't even ordered. Before he could overthink it further, the sound of quick footsteps drew his attention. Emily appeared, a hint of excitement in her stride, wearing a simple white shirt tucked into faded jeans. Her hair was tied up loosely, and in her hand was a small notebook. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said, sitting down with a warm smile. "I wasn't sure I would either," Arya replied, straight-faced. She chuckled and motioned for the waiter. "2 coffees. 1 black, 1 latte," she told him without looking away from Arya. "I guessed right, didn't I?" He gave a small nod. For a while, they sat in a comfortable silence. The aroma of coffee mingled with the sounds of distant horns and passing scooters. Emily leaned forward slightly. "To be honest, I don't usually feel this comfortable with strangers. You don't strike me as someone who trusts easily," Arya said, taking a sip of his coffee. "You're right," she replied, then paused. "Especially after I started chasing something dangerous." Arya raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. Emily slowly pulled a photo from her notebook and placed it on the table. Arya's expression shifted instantly. The photo showed an Indonesian man in a clean-cut suit, standing beside several Western businessmen. His face was familiar. "That's Agus Santoso," Emily said. "I know the name," Arya replied. "He's in the news a lot. Philanthropist. Big on foreign cooperation programs." Emily shook her head. "That's just the public image. Back in New York, we've traced financial links tying him to illegal trafficking, of people, weapons, even drugs. He uses charity organizations as a front. Arya stared at the photo longer than necessary, his military instincts already assessing the implications. You came all the way here for this? He asked. Emily nodded. He's smart. Operates cleanly. But I found a trail, documents, accounts, shell companies. And I need someone local. Someone I can trust. Her voice trembled slightly as she added. And for some reason, I trust you. Arya didn't respond immediately. Her words hung between them, soft but heavy. He looked down at the photo again. He knew people like Aegis, untouchable from the outside, protected by power and money. If what you're saying is true, he finally said, you're already in danger. I know. He stared at her, searching for any sign of doubt. But there was none. Fine, he said at last. But promise me one thing, don't do anything alone. Not here. Emily smiled gently. Deal. They clinked their coffee cups together, an unspoken pact sealed in caffeine and conviction. Later that evening, Arya returned to his base and went straight to his desk. He pulled up archived news reports, intelligence briefings, and internal memos. Aegis Santoso's name came up again and again, always clean, always surrounded by smiling officials. Too clean. As the hours passed, Arya couldn't shake the feeling. He had spent years in the army, facing real threats. But this was something different. Hidden. Protected. Dangerous. Meanwhile, in her hotel room, Emily sat cross-legged on the bed, typing furiously. Her laptop screen glowed with spreadsheets, confidential memos, and correspondence between supposed charity groups. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from urgency. She wasn't just chasing a story anymore. She was walking into a war. The next day, Arya picked her up in civilian clothes, his car unmarked. Emily noticed how different he looked without the uniform, less guarded, more human. You look tense, she said, trying to ease the silence. Arya kept his eyes on the road. You need to be careful. We don't know who's watching, including your own contacts. Emily's face fell. You think someone close to me? I think it's best to trust no one, Arya said. Except the ones willing to take a bullet for you. Emily turned to the window, the Jakarta traffic blurring her reflection. She realized this wasn't just about an article or an investigation anymore. Arya was risking everything to protect her. And that terrified her more than she wanted to admit. They stopped at a small, quiet restaurant on the edge of the city. As they waited for their food, Emily pulled out a thin folder from her bag. I found the address of one of Aegis's shell companies. It's registered as a logistics firm, but it doesn't exist in any legitimate directory. She showed Arya a printout with coordinates and contact information. We go tomorrow, she added. Arya was about to respond when he suddenly turned, eyes narrowed. Across the street, a man in dark clothing stood still, watching them. Arya stood quickly and pulled Emily up. Don't look back. Walk. She followed without question. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. They ducked into a side alley and crouched behind a closed storefront. Arya peeked out. He's gone, he whispered. Emily's hands trembled. They're watching, aren't they? Arya didn't answer. His silence said it all. That night Arya dropped her at the hotel, but didn't leave. I'm staying nearby. Just in case, he said. You don't have to. I want to, he interrupted. Emily stood there, watching him walk back to his car. The growing warmth in her chest scared her more than the shadows stalking her. Back in her room, Emily opened her laptop and stared at the red folder filled with names, financial transactions, and photographs of men in dark suits exchanging briefcases. She was close to something big. Something dangerous. And now Arya was part of it too. From her window, she saw his car parked outside. She smiled faintly. She had found something worth fighting for. And she wasn't ready to lose it. The morning air in Jakarta was heavier than usual, thick with the weight of things unspoken. Outside a rusting gate in an old industrial area, Arya and Emily stood in silence, staring at a decaying building that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. "This is the address," Emily said, holding up a crumpled printout. "Registered under one of Agus's demi companies. It looks abandoned, but I don't buy it." Arya's eyes scanned the surroundings, every muscle in his body alert. The building's cracked facade, boarded-up windows, and rotting signage told a lie only fools would believe. It was too perfectly forgotten. He nodded. "Let's move. Quick in, quick out." The moment they stepped through the dented metal door, the smell of mildew and rust hit them. Dust clung to everything. Broken furniture was scattered across the floor. And yet, amid the decay, something didn't fit. Arya's boots crunched against glass as he led the way down a hallway. Emily followed, holding a small camera hidden in her jacket, recording everything. They reached a back room. Old filing cabinets lined the walls. Most drawers were filled with blank forms, shredded documents, or decaying paper. But then, tucked behind a stack of rusted clipboards, Emily found it, a red folder. New. Untouched by dust. She opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, names, bank transfers, shipping logs, and what looked like a list of politicians and foreign executives. Arya leaned over her shoulder, eyes narrowing. "This can't be real," he muttered. "That's a government official. And that's a UN consultant." Emily's hands shook. "This is bigger than I imagined. This isn't just trafficking. It's diplomacy, media, finance, all tied together." Then they heard it. Footsteps. Arya stiffened and motioned for silence. The heavy steps were deliberate, 2, maybe 3 men. Armed, judging by the way the floor vibrated with every stride. Arya pulled Emily toward a large storage closet. They slipped inside, leaving the door cracked open just enough to see. 2 men entered the room, both carrying rifles. They scanned the space, one heading toward the filing cabinets, the other pacing toward the window. Emily held her breath. Arya reached down and removed a small knife tucked into his boot. If they were discovered, there would be no time for talk. But by some miracle, the men didn't check the closet. After a few tense minutes, they exited, footsteps fading. Arya exhaled slowly. "Time to go," he whispered. They crawled out through a back window and sprinted into a narrow alley behind the building. Neither spoke until they were back in Arya's car, breathless and covered in dust. Emily clutched the red folder to her chest like it was her lifeline. Back on the road, Arya spoke first. "You need to leave. Today." Emily turned, stunned. "What? Why?" "Hand the documents to your embassy. Go back to New York. Let them handle it. I didn't come all this way to run. This isn't about courage anymore. This is about staying alive." Emily's voice dropped. "And what about you?" Arya pulled the car over and stared at her, his eyes hard. "If they find out we were in that building, if they connect you to me, we both become targets. But only one of us is trained to handle that." Emily was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I won't leave you behind." Arya looked away. "You're stubborn. You like that about me," she said quietly. He said nothing, but the silence between them was charged. That night Arya sat at his desk transferring the contents of the red folder onto an encrypted flash drive. He stared at the names again and again, recognizing too many. This wasn't just a story. It was a landmine. Meanwhile, at her hotel, Emily finished writing her preliminary report and sent a secure copy to her editor in New York. Moments later, the power in her room went out. She froze. Then came a knock. Soft. Rhythmic. She approached the door carefully. "Arya?" she whispered. No answer. The knock turned into a shove. Then a crash. 2 masked men burst in. Emily screamed, scrambling toward the bathroom, but one grabbed her from behind and covered her mouth. She struggled, but it was no use. In moments, she was dragged out of the room. The flash drive hidden beneath the mattress remained untouched. Across the city, Arya received a text. 1 word. Help. He didn't wait for orders. He jumped on his motorbike and raced through the rain-slick streets, weaving through traffic with tunnel vision. He reached the hotel in under 10 minutes. The room was a mess. Furniture overturned. Blood on the floor. But no Emily. Arya stood there, frozen, but not for long. He called a name he hadn't spoken in years. Yuda, he said into the phone. I need your help. Now. Yuda had once worked in military intelligence. He trusted Arya without question. I've got a tracker ping, Yuda said minutes later. She's being taken to the old port warehouse. North Dock. Arya was already gone before the sentence ended. The northern port smelled of salt and oil. Darkness hung over the abandoned containers like a shroud. Arya crept in through the back, moving like a ghost among shadows. Inside the warehouse, Emily was tied to a chair. Bruised. Bleeding. But conscious. From the shadows stepped a figure Arya recognized from the photograph. Agas Santoso. You thought you could expose us? He sneered. You think your papers mean anything? Emily lifted her head, defiant. I'm not alone. Then came the gunshot. Not at her, but outside. Chaos erupted. Arya burst in like a storm, taking down one guard instantly. Gunfire echoed through the space. Metal clanged. Shouts rang out. Despite a bullet tearing through his shoulder, Arya fought with the desperation of a man with nothing to lose. He reached Emily and began untying her as more guards rushed in. Agas appeared again, pointing a gun. Move, and she dies! He screamed. Arya stepped in front of Emily. Then shoot, he growled. Before the trigger could pull, police sirens blared. Reinforcements flooded the warehouse. Yuda's team swarmed in, guns drawn. Agas tried to run, but was tackled to the ground. Emily threw her arms around Arya, sobbing. You're insane, she cried. You're worth it, he whispered, collapsing into her embrace. Rain poured over Jakarta like a final curtain falling after a dramatic play. In the military hospital ward, fluorescent lights hummed softly as Arya lay on a cot, his shoulder bandaged, a quiet monitor beeping beside him. It wasn't a serious wound, but enough to keep him under observation for a few days. Despite the pain, he felt something he hadn't in years: peace. By his side sat Emily, her face pale but determined, never straying more than a few feet from his bed. 4 hours she had said little, occasionally holding his hand, sometimes just watching him breathe. But in her silence, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. You should get some sleep, Arya said softly. Emily shook her head. Not until you're better. I'll heal. You almost died. She gave a weak smile. So did you. A long pause. I sent the documents, she finally whispered. To my editor, to the embassy, to the UN desk. Everything's out now. Agas won't walk away from this. His whole network's going to collapse. Arya nodded slowly. Then it was worth it. Emily leaned her head gently against his arm. You risked everything for me. No, he said after a moment. I risked everything for what's right. But I couldn't have done it without you. For a while, there was only the rain outside and the rhythmic beep of the monitor. And in that silence, they both knew their connection had gone far beyond shared danger. What they had now was real. A week later, Arya stood once again in uniform, but not on a mission. He was in a courtyard behind the TNI headquarters, where a small ceremony was taking place. The air was crisp, and the sky glowed with the warm colors of sunset. Major Satrio approached him, solemn and firm. Leda Arya, he began. Your actions went against standard protocol. But they saved a life, and more importantly, uncovered a network that endangered thousands. The crowd of officers and guests stood quietly as the major pinned a commendation badge on Arya's chest. You are, without a doubt, one of our bravest, he added. Arya simply nodded, humbled. Not far away, Emily watched with pride, her eyes glassy. Dressed simply in a cream-colored blouse and black skirt, she looked every bit like the woman who had once wandered into his life by accident, and had stayed by choice. After the ceremony, Arya joined her by the courtyard's edge. "You look proud," he said with a slight smile. "I am," she replied. "But I also know what this cost you." He shook his head. "I gained more than I lost." They stood quietly for a moment before Arya added, "You know, I never imagined falling in love with a journalist from New York." Emily chuckled. "And I never imagined falling for a soldier in Jakarta." "Well," he said, "here we are." Weeks passed, and the story Emily uncovered rocked Southeast Asia. Her article went viral. International agencies began their investigations. Agus Santoso's network unraveled piece by piece, and with every new headline, Emily's name gained recognition, not just as a journalist, but as a voice for justice. But instead of going back to America, she stayed. They rented a small house on the outskirts of the city, far from the noise and the danger. Life slowed down, just enough for healing. One quiet evening, they sat on their porch, sipping warm tea as the cicadas sang in the background. A faint breeze carried the scent of frangipani through the air. "You could have gone back to New York," Arya said, watching the horizon. Emily smiled. "And miss this?" He turned to her. "You miss your world sometimes?" "I do. But I've found a better one." Arya looked at her, eyes filled with a rare tenderness. "Love requires struggle," he said. "And I'd fight every battle again, just to have this." Emily reached out, lacing her fingers through his. "You're not alone in that." In that moment, everything else faded: politics, borders, past wounds. All that remained was the promise they were building together. Months later, a quiet wedding was held in a sunlit garden behind the house. It wasn't lavish. There were no high-profile guests, no cameras. Just a handful of close friends, a few trusted soldiers, and one local imam who guided them through their vows. Emily wore a modest white dress, her hair loosely pinned. Arya wore his dress uniform, polished and precise. As they stood under the golden sky, hands clasped, hearts full, they made a vow that had nothing to do with war or justice or danger. Only love. A photo from that day, Emily's head resting on Arya's shoulder, both of them laughing gently under the fading sun, would later appear in the final page of her best-selling book, Crossfire Hearts, a true story of love and conspiracy in Southeast Asia. Now every morning, they wake up together. Sometimes to birdsong, sometimes to the sound of distant prayer calls echoing through the neighborhoods. Their life is not perfect, but it is honest. It is earned. Emily teaches part-time at a journalism institute, mentoring young voices on how to chase truth without fear. Arya continues his service, now assigned to international coordination and humanitarian units. And in the evenings they sit on that same porch with tea in hand, watching the sun set again and again. "I used to think stories like ours were fiction," Emily said one night. Arya looked at her. "Maybe that's why we had to live it." And as they sat together, beneath the soft glow of lanterns and stars, they knew. Their story was never just about love. It was about two strangers from two worlds thrown into chaos, who chose to fight, to protect, to trust, and finally, to stay. Forever. Berlin in the fall felt colder than usual. But perhaps it wasn't the weather, perhaps it was just Julia. She sat quietly on a white sofa in her living room, staring blankly through the raindrops streaking across the windowpane. Light rain danced against the glass, creating shimmering trails that blurred the view of the city outside. The streets glistened under the glow of street lamps, and cars passed in silence, their tires hissing on the wet asphalt. But inside Julia's apartment, time seemed to stand still. On the glass table in front of her lay a single sheet of paper. Divorce papers. Her name was printed beside his, Jonas, the man she once believed would be her forever. Her hands trembled as she picked up the wedding ring she had removed the day she discovered his betrayal. It still gleamed in the soft light, but it meant nothing now. She rolled it slowly across the table's surface, watching it spin, sparkle, and fall still. Just like her marriage. Just like her heart. A deep sigh escaped her chest. She had cried for days, screamed into her pillow, asked herself 100 questions, none of which were ever answered. The affair had shattered her trust, her dreams, and most painfully, her identity. She had been Mrs. Jonas Weber for so long that she didn't know who she was without him. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Her thoughts spiraled. I can't stay here. Not another day. Not in this city. Not in this apartment where every corner reminds me of him. She looked around and saw the ghosts of her past, the sofa where they watched movies together, the kitchen where they used to cook Sunday breakfasts, the hallway where he once kissed her forehead every morning before leaving for work. Now, all that was gone. Her eyes fell on a travel brochure lying on the edge of the table, something she had picked up days ago at a coffee shop but hadn't paid much attention to. The image on the front showed a stunning white sand beach under a golden sky, with the word Bali printed in bold. A tropical escape, it promised. A different world. Julia stared at it for a long time. She had never been to Indonesia. She barely knew anything about it. But suddenly, the idea of flying halfway across the world to a place where no one knew her felt right. Far from Berlin. Far from Jonas. Far from pain. She opened her phone and searched for flights. Within minutes she had booked a ticket, departure in less than 48 hours. It was impulsive, reckless even, but something inside her knew she had to go. This wasn't a vacation. This was an escape. Ngurah Rai International Airport, Denpasar, Bali, 2 days later. The sound of suitcase wheels echoed beneath her as she navigated through the bustling airport. Julia wore a long cream-colored coat, her light brown hair tied loosely, and her blue eyes fixed straight ahead. The flight had been long, over 18 hours, and she was exhausted. But her mind was still restless. She stepped out of the airport and into a different world. The air was warm and sticky, laced with the faint scent of sea salt and incense. Taxis honked. Vendors shouted in Bahasa. The colors were vibrant, bright sarongs, orange marigold garlands, green palm trees swaying gently in the breeze. A local driver approached her. "Miss, you need taxi?" She nodded and showed him the address of the private villa she had booked. "First time in Bali?" he asked with a smile. "Yes," she replied quietly. "You will love it here," he said. "Bali is peaceful. Bali is healing." Julia gave a polite smile, but said nothing. Her heart still felt too heavy to believe in such promises. As the taxi drove through narrow streets, she watched the passing scenery. Tiny temples adorned with offerings, children playing barefoot, women balancing baskets on their heads, and men in orange vests sweeping the roads. Everything was unfamiliar yet oddly soothing. Finally, they arrived at her villa. It was a wooden structure in traditional Balinese style, nestled by the sea. A private pool glistened in the sunlight, and beyond it, the waves of the Indian Ocean crashed rhythmically against the shore. She stepped onto the balcony, dropped her bags, and breathed deeply for the first time in days. The salty air kissed her cheeks. The wind tousled her hair. She closed her eyes. For a moment, just a moment, she felt okay. That night, sleep came late. Julia sat on the edge of her bed, hugging her knees. The soft breeze from the open balcony door brushed past her skin, carrying with it the distant sound of something different. A voice. A call. It was faint, melodic, echoing from somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the street, drifting on the night wind. It was unlike any song or sound she had ever heard before. A chant, peaceful, rhythmic, calming. She stood up and stepped onto the balcony. And there it was again. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Though she didn't understand the words, she felt a sudden stillness in her soul. It was as if the voice reached a part of her heart that had long been buried. It wrapped around her pain like a warm shawl, softening her grief, gently asking her to rest. She closed her eyes. The sound of the adhan, the Islamic call to prayer, continued to float through the air. And Julia, a woman far from home, broken by betrayal, stood quietly in the moonlight, her heart beginning to stir in ways she couldn't yet understand. What is that sound? Why does it feel safe? She didn't know. But she wanted to find out. The next morning, The sky above Bali turned shades of soft orange and gold, casting a warm glow over the quiet town streets. Julia stood barefoot on the cool stone floor of her villa's balcony, sipping a cup of hot tea. The sound from last night, the hauntingly beautiful call to prayer, still lingered in her mind like a forgotten melody that refused to fade. She couldn't sleep. Not because she was restless, but because she was curious. At 2 a.m., she had opened her phone and typed into the search bar, "What is the Muslim call to prayer?" Dozens of results appeared. She clicked one. "The Adhan is the Islamic call to prayer, performed 5 times a day. It serves as a reminder to believers to turn away from the world's distractions and remember Allah." She read on. The voice she'd heard had a name, a purpose, a reason. And somehow, it had reached her heart. Julia set her tea down and grabbed her sandals. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she needed to walk, to clear her head, to follow whatever invisible thread had tugged at her soul since last night. She wandered through narrow streets lined with coconut trees, passing little shrines and incense-filled corners, until the tourist zones faded behind her. Her steps eventually led to a quieter neighborhood, with worn sidewalks and modest homes. It was here she noticed a small white building with a short tower and a green dome. A mosque. It was peaceful. No loudspeakers now. No crowd. Just stillness. Julia stood across the street, hesitant. Her heart pounded. Should she cross? Should she enter? She wasn't sure. And then, something unexpected happened. A man sprinted past her, chasing a teenager on a motorbike who had just snatched someone's wallet. Julia's eyes widened. The man wasn't dressed like a policeman. He wore an orange uniform with reflective strips and the logo Denpasar City Cleaning Service printed on the back. Within moments he caught the boy, retrieved the wallet, and walked calmly back toward Julia, slightly breathless but smiling. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing her pale face. Julia nodded, still stunned. "Yes, that was incredible." The man chuckled. "That happens sometimes here. But don't worry, not often." He was tanned from the sun, with slightly messy black hair and warm, honest eyes. He looked like someone who had seen life from the ground up, literally. "My name is Ali," he said, offering his hand. "Julia," she replied, shaking it gently. "First time in Bali?" She nodded. "I just arrived yesterday." Ali smiled. "Welcome. You came at the right time. The weather is kind. The sea is calm." Julia glanced again at the mosque behind him. Ali followed her gaze. "You're interested in the mosque?" Her cheeks flushed. I heard something last night. A voice. It was beautiful. Peaceful. I didn't understand the words, but it calmed me." Ali's face softened. "That was the Adhan. I read about it online," Julia said quietly. "But I want to know more." Ali looked thoughtful for a moment. "The Adhan is not just a call. It's an invitation. To pause. To remember. To connect with Allah. Many people, Muslim or not, feel something when they hear it." Julia was silent, absorbing every word. "You can come inside," Ali offered, nodding toward the mosque. "There's no service right now, but it's always open for anyone seeking peace." She hesitated. Ali didn't pressure her. He simply smiled and added, "If you ever want to talk, or learn more, I'm usually around here." For the first time in days, Julia smiled back, genuinely. That afternoon, Julia sat alone at a small cafe near her villa, staring at the menu without really reading it. Her thoughts were full. Not about Jonas or Berlin, but about Ali, the mosque, the sound of the Adhan, and the unfamiliar warmth she'd felt talking to him. He was just a street cleaner. But he had spoken with more depth, more gentleness, than most of the people she had known in her wealthy European circles. Who is this man? And why does he feel so familiar? She opened her phone again and searched. What is Islam? She had never dared to look it up before. All her life, she'd only heard about it from news headlines, usually negative, always distant. But now, something was different. She wanted to know for herself. As she scrolled through articles, one sentence struck her. Islam is the surrender of one's soul to God. It is not just a religion, it is a way of life. Julia read further, about the 5 pillars, about the Qur'an, about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Her eyes kept returning to one particular phrase. Islam is about peace through submission. She whispered the words aloud. Peace. Yes. That was what she'd been searching for all along. The next day, just after sunrise, Julia returned to the small mosque. Her heart beat faster as she approached the gate. It was quiet again, the streets still sleepy. Inside, a few worshippers sat reading silently. Ali was there too, sweeping the outer courtyard with calm focus. When he looked up and saw her, he smiled. You came back, he said gently. Julia nodded. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Ali set aside the broom and walked over. Would you like to see the inside? She nodded again. He led her quietly inside. The walls were simple, but clean. Soft green carpets covered the floor. Arabic calligraphy adorned the walls. It didn't feel like a temple or a cathedral. It felt like a place meant for thinking, for pausing. Ali handed her a Qur'an with English translation. This might help you start. Julia took it carefully in her hands. Don't worry if it feels overwhelming, he said. Take your time. She looked at him, unsure what to say. Why are you helping me? Ali thought for a moment. Because I once searched for peace too. And someone helped me. I'm just paying it forward. Julia's eyes softened. For the first time since Jonas shattered her world, she felt a strange kind of safety. Not from wealth. Not from romance. But from truth. From sincerity. That night she returned to her villa with the Qur'an in her hands and a storm of questions in her heart. She sat on the balcony, opened the book, and began to read. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. As the stars blinked above her, and the waves whispered below, Julia felt something shifting deep inside. She didn't know what the next step was. But for the first time in years, she was not afraid to find out. The days passed gently in Bali. Each morning, Julia woke to the sound of the sea, the warmth of the sun through her window, and the distant echo of the adhan that somehow grew more familiar with each passing day. And each day, she returned to the small mosque. Ali was always there, sometimes sweeping, sometimes reading, sometimes simply sitting on the mosque steps watching the world go by with quiet contentment. He never pushed her to believe. Never asked too many questions. He simply listened, shared when she asked, and guided her softly through the teachings of Islam. Julia asked about everything: prayer, fasting, the Qur'an, even the way Muslims washed before they prayed. Every answer was given without pride, without pressure. Only sincerity. She was learning. Slowly. Deeply. And she was changing. One night, Julia sat on the edge of her villa's balcony, the Qur'an resting on her lap. Her fingers gently ran over the English translation as she read. Indeed, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. Surah Ar-Raid, 13:28. She closed the book and stared out at the stars. Is this the peace I've been missing my whole life? Tears welled up in her eyes, not out of sadness, but from the quiet realization that something inside her had shifted. Permanently. For the first time, her pain had a meaning. Her heartbreak had a purpose. Her soul had direction. She picked up her phone and typed into Google. How to become a Muslim. She read. The first step is to declare the Shahada, bearing witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Julia whispered it softly under her breath. La ilaha illallah. Muhammadur Rasulullah. Her voice trembled, not out of fear, but out of awe. But not all moments of awakening are easy. The next morning, she called her mother in Berlin. Her thumb hovered over the dial button for a long time before she finally pressed it. Hello? Her mother's voice was cautious, hesitant. Mama. Julia's voice cracked. It's me. Julia! Finally. Where have you been? You disappeared. We were worried. I'm in Bali, she replied quietly. Bali? What are you doing there? There was a long pause. Then Julia took a breath. Mama, I've found something here. Something important. What do you mean? I've been learning about Islam. About faith. About myself. I think I've found the truth. There was a stunned silence. You what? Her mother finally said, voice rising. I'm not the same person anymore. I've felt more peace here in these few weeks than I ever did in all my years back home. Her mother's voice hardened. Julia, please tell me you're joking. I'm not, Julia whispered. I can't believe this. Islam? Julia, do you know what that means for our family? What people will say. I don't care what they say, Julia replied, her voice shaking but steady. For the first time, I feel whole. You're throwing your life away. No, Mama. I'm finally building one. Then came the word she feared the most. If you don't come home, don't bother calling us again. And just like that, the line went dead. Julia stared at her phone, her fingers frozen, her heart thundering. Her mother was gone. Her family had turned their back. And yet her heart whispered, Allah is still here. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ali came by the villa holding 2 glasses of warm tea. He knocked gently, and Julia opened the door with red eyes. Ali didn't ask what happened. He just handed her a glass and sat beside her on the steps. The silence between them was filled with the hum of crickets and the distant crash of waves. I talked to my mother, Julia said after a long pause. She said if I don't return, I'm no longer her daughter. Ali looked at her quietly. His expression didn't change, but his eyes spoke volumes. I knew this would be hard, she continued, but I didn't know it would feel like losing everything. Ali nodded. Even the prophets were tested, Julia. The road to truth is never without trials. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I thought this would feel like peace, but right now it just hurts. Sometimes, Ali said softly, pain is the gate we pass through to reach peace. Julia turned to him, her voice fragile. Why are you always here? Why do you care so much? Ali hesitated, then said something she didn't expect. Because I see myself in you. She blinked. I was once lost too. Not in heartbreak, but in pride. I had everything mapped out, until life humbled me. I had to lose to truly see. Julia swallowed the lump in her throat. And because, he added after a pause, I respect your courage. Most people spend their whole lives running from what they feel. But you're running toward it. She didn't know how to respond. So she simply leaned her head slightly toward him, the space between them filled with something unspoken but real. In the days that followed, Julia found herself spending more time at the mosque. She joined small study groups. She asked questions. She listened. And she felt herself blooming into someone she didn't recognize, but someone she liked. One morning, after far prayer, she sat on the mosque's quiet porch, watching the sun rise over the rooftops. Ali came and sat beside her, as he often did. I think I'm ready, Julia said. For what? He asked gently. For the next step. For Shaida. Ali smiled. Then let's go speak to the Imam. In a small prayer room behind the mosque, the Imam stood before her with kind eyes and a patient smile. Ali stood to her side, offering nothing but quiet support. You only need to say the words with sincerity, the Imam said. Julia took a deep breath. Then she spoke. Ashhadu alla ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. The words left her lips softly, but they thundered in her chest. And then silence, followed by tears. Tears that she didn't even try to hold back. Tears of relief. Tears of return. Ali stepped forward, placing a hand over his heart. Welcome, Julia. She looked up at him and whispered, Thank you, for showing me the way. The days after Julia's Shaida felt like the soft hush after a heavy rain. Peace had found her, not as a fleeting emotion, but as a quiet, constant presence, like the sound of waves always meeting the shore. Her steps felt lighter, her breaths deeper. Her heart, once shattered, now beat with a purpose she had never known before. But healing, she realized, doesn't erase the scars. One afternoon, Julia sat alone on the edge of her villa's balcony, the same place where she had first heard the call to prayer. The ocean shimmered below. The sun cast long, golden shadows across the sea. The Qur'an lay open in her lap. She wasn't reading this time, just reflecting. She thought of her family. Her mother's silence still stung. Her father hadn't called at all. She had tried twice to reach out. Both calls went unanswered. The rejection wasn't loud, it was quiet, cold, and absolute. Yet through the grief, something kept whispering, "You are not alone. Allah is with you." That truth, simple and beautiful, kept her standing. Ali had become a part of her everyday life, sometimes as a guide, sometimes as a friend, and other times, something more. It wasn't a spoken love. Not yet. But it was there in the way his eyes lit up when she shared what she'd learned from the Qur'an. It was in the way he stood protectively near her when curious strangers asked questions. It was in the way he never let her feel like a burden, even when she cried in silence, struggling to rebuild her life from scratch. One evening, Julia finally spoke what had been resting in her heart. They were sitting on the steps of the mosque after Maghrib prayer. The sky was purple, fading into blue. "Ali," she said softly, "can I ask you something personal?" He turned toward her, waiting. "Why are you still alone?" she asked. "Why haven't you married?" Ali chuckled lightly. "That's a long story. I have time." He paused, then answered honestly. "I always thought I'd marry someone simple. Someone from here. But life never aligned that way. And the older I got, the more I realized I didn't just want a wife. I wanted a partner who understands what it means to search for truth." Julia looked down at her hands. "And now?" Ali smiled gently. "Now I think Allah brings people into our lives when we're finally ready for them." She looked up. Their eyes met. The air between them held something unspoken but undeniable. "I don't know what comes next," Julia admitted, "but I know that whatever it is, I want it to be rooted in what I found here. In faith." Ali nodded slowly. "Then I will speak to the Imam. If this is truly written for us, we must begin it the right way." Julia's heart pounded. She had come to Bali to escape pain. Instead, she had found love, not the kind that sweeps in with passion and leaves with storms, but the kind that grows slowly, like roots deepening in fertile soil. The nikah ceremony was held quietly at the mosque. Just a few witnesses. Just the Imam. Just them. Julia wore a simple cream-colored dress and a soft white hijab. She had chosen to keep her own name legally, but among the local Muslims, she became known as Jamila, beautiful. Ali wore a plain white shirt and slacks, his heart steady, his soul grateful. There were no grand decorations. No photographers. Just smiles, tears, and a sense that something sacred was unfolding in silence. As they signed the marriage contract, Ali whispered, "You know, I never thought I'd marry someone from Germany." Julia laughed softly. "And I never thought I'd marry a street sweeper in Bali." He raised an eyebrow. "Still time to change your mind." "Too late," she smiled. "Allah wrote it. I'm just living it." Together, they started a simple life. Ali still worked with the city's cleaning service. Julia began volunteering at a nearby pazantran, helping young girls practice English and teaching them small lessons from her own journey. They lived modestly, in a small rented home near the beach. The furniture was second-hand, the floor often sandy, and the kitchen filled with the smell of spice and warmth. But it felt more like home than her luxury apartment in Berlin ever had. There were hard days, of course. Days when Julia missed her mother's voice. Days when a familiar song would bring tears to her eyes. But Ali never let her grieve alone. One evening, Julia received a message. It was from her father. "Your mother won't say it, but she misses you. I still don't understand your choice, but I see you're at peace. Maybe someday, we'll talk again. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reunion. But it was a beginning. Months passed. Julia no longer counted the days since her conversion. She no longer marked the hours since her family turned away. Her life was no longer measured by what she had lost, but by what she was building. One night, as they sat under the stars, Julia turned to Ali and said, "Do you remember the first thing you ever said to me?" Ali thought for a moment. "Was it when I caught the pickpocket?" "No," she grinned. "It was, Bali is peaceful. Bali is healing." He smiled. "And was I right?" She looked around. At the sea. The stars. The mosque glowing in the distance. And at him. "You were absolutely right. They never lived rich. They never moved to the city. But together, they built a small community center near the mosque. A place where new converts could come for support. A place where faith met kindness, and where hearts from every background could find rest." Jamila, once Julia, became known in the village not as the German woman who converted, but as the one who smiled like she had never been broken. Because she hadn't just converted to Islam. She had found peace. And love. And purpose. Not through perfection. But through surrender.